This is episode 225 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, it is another insanely busy week. These are supposed to be the dog days of August, and yet there is so much going on.
Summertime and the living is easy where we just sit around and do nothing. That has not been my experience, Paul.
No. Well, we've been sitting around waiting for the governor to decide that we've all been good little boys and girls and that we're meeting our gating criteria under her own supposed rules and guidelines. And yet, last Thursday, we didn't have a press conference. We don't know when or if our good behavior will get us out on parole. I'm taking the metaphor further and further, but it just seems hard to understand why, with the virus rates of infection continuing to plummet and achieving all of the governor's standards, that we would still be under this lockdown.
We are in bring me a rock territory. So we have brought all the rocks from the first thing, but we maybe have to bring some more. And as I joked in last week's show, COVID's over and we're back to normal. Maybe not. So I don't know what it's going to take, but the thing that's most disturbed me about recently what's going on is she cited New Zealand as the example. And so a couple of things. New Zealand's an island. We are not an island. New Zealand never had very many cases, but also New Zealand's economy is in horrible shape. And they declared victory. They had some more cases, and so they shut the economy down. And so, if we're going to try to emulate New Zealand, we have none of their advantages, all of their disadvantages. And I think we could end up being, I don't know, dare we say the 50th state in the nation, the worst economy of all, if we keep on this path that we're on, which is really highly destructive to the economics, the employment, and heaven forbid, even for those federal government workers, the tax base of the state.
Yeah, just to be clear where you're getting the information about what the governor's saying, she wrote another op-ed. We were graced with yet another Michelle Lujan Grisham opinion piece in Sunday's Journal. And she said that we could be the New Zealand of the United States. Well, their headline from The Guardian, although it's pretty much ubiquitous, Jacinda Ardern says 2020 has been frankly terrible as Auckland, that is, I think, the largest city in New Zealand, lockdown is extended. Masks made mandatory on public transport across New Zealand as coronavirus cases continue to rise. So essentially, things aren't going so well in New Zealand, an island nation with many advantages. Also, they haven't had many problems yet, but definitely it looks like things are going in the wrong direction in New Zealand. And then the governor, in her same op-ed piece, says, here's the hard part. We're in this fight until there's an effective and widely accessible vaccine for COVID-19. There's no finish line, not until then.
And that until could be a decade away.
That is truly frightening. That is a very scary Orwellian statement by our governor. There's so many, we could spend the next 45 minutes just talking about that one line from her opinion piece. I think the one that sticks out to me, Wally, is that folks have by now probably seen the pictures from Wuhan, China, a bunch of young people in kind of, we used to have the beach here. They basically have a huge swimming pool area and a bunch of young people, very, very unsocially distanced over there in Wuhan. And I'm not here to bash the Chinese or folks in Wuhan. The virus seems to have completely gone away. We question the Chinese government's data, but what we're getting at here is there is no vaccine in China. That I don't think there is. There is no vaccine here. And yet, Chinese young people are now able to have gigantic pool parties, not socially distanced at all, and basically enjoy themselves, while our governor is at least rhetorically setting us up for months, if not years, of status quo, social distancing, et cetera, until there's a vaccine, which we have no idea when there will be one. And even if we do have one, the flu vaccine doesn't stop all cases of the flu, even if people have it.
And there's a new vaccine every year, and it still doesn't stop it. The other comment that's made, and this is one's growing a little bit old, but the thought that, well, maybe we should wear masks forever because we've always had the flu, and maybe that would help. So every winter we'll wear masks. So I don't know. You know what? I would be happy if a little common sense would prevail on this mask thing. Exercising when you're out there in the foothills of Albuquerque and nobody's out there, or if you're hiking in the forest, really you're supposed to wear a mask. It reminds me of, a lot of things that happen. The IRS has been good at this over the history, is that you can make a criminal out of everybody. And I think this is what we've come to in New Mexico.
Yeah, exactly. It is a just very scary situation with this governor, and the fact that so many aspects of this virus, in terms of stopping its spread, seem to be so hard to wrap your head around, whether any of these policies have been effective. Certainly they can prevent the spread for a while, but at what cost? And ultimately, the costs are starting to come home. Now, before we talk about the unemployment statistics for New Mexico, which the Bureau of Labor Statistics recently released for July of 2020, it's worth noting that New Mexico has a lot of advantages in terms of not losing jobs. It doesn't mean we're economically stronger than any of our neighboring states, but we have a lot of people in this state with consistent paychecks in ways that other people do not have. They're either outright government employees, military, or parts of the national labs. We have a lot of people getting checks from the welfare programs, et cetera, et cetera. So when something like this virus happens, initially we're going to be in pretty good shape. But the chickens do come home to roost. And you look at these unemployment data, the states that have high unemployment rates, Massachusetts really has, it's amazing. They have the highest unemployment rate in the nation right now, 16.1%. New York, 15.9%. Both of those states have been ravaged by the virus. New York, of course, most notably.
Really orders of magnitude more than New Mexico.
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah.
Not just a few more cases or,
Yeah.
20, 50% more, hundreds of percent more than New Mexico.
Basically, yeah, East Coast blue states have been totally ravaged in terms of death rates and all kinds of issues. Now, Nevada is a tourist-based economy. Nevada has a 14% unemployment rate. It's not a surprise. I mean, anyone who goes, and when it comes to Nevada and their economy, really Las Vegas is the driver there.
And
all
in the back
shows-
seat is Reno, which is a mini
True.
Las Vegas in a lot
Right.
of ways. So
True, yeah, but none of the shows, none of the things that make Las Vegas are happening now, and you want to put people out of work, shut the entire economy down, tell people not to fly, not to go out of state. That is just devastating. So that is Nevada at 14%, New Jersey 13.8%, Pennsylvania 13.7%, California surprisingly at 13.3%. Now, California is a blue state, but it hasn't been hit as hard by the virus. It might be just the lockdown itself as opposed to the virus itself, because California has taken a very harsh approach. Hawaii, tourist-driven, initially they were not hit very hard by the virus. They're at 13.1%. People aren't going out of state. They're not traveling. on
And
airplanes.
Hawaii has they have a similar 14-day quarantine like New Mexico's. Theirs has some teeth because you fly
Yes,
in and
very
they
significant
escort
too.
you to your hotel or the equivalent.
And then there comes New Mexico at 12.7% unemployment. So that is really a kick in the pants for New Mexicans, and it's bad news. We shouldn't be in this boat. We have been locked down though, and our tourism industry is devastated. Restaurants are obviously challenged, and the oil and gas industry, let's not forget, has been impacted as well. Other neighboring states, while Arizona has certainly had its share of problems, is at 10.6% unemployment. We have Texas, which has also had its share of problems, but overall their economy remains a juggernaut, 8% unemployment. Colorado, 7.4%, Oklahoma, 7.1%, and the lowest unemployment rate in the entire US of A. It's like the virus never happened. Utah, 4.5%.
Wow.
That
Wow.
is impressive. South Dakota, by the way, our hero, so many conservatives' hero, Kristi Noem, she opposed doing anything, legally trying to lock down her state. They're at 6.3%, which is low. It's let's see, fifth lowest in the entire country. Not as low as Utah, but definitely within reason. So overall, we've got some work to do, and the question is, will our governor take her feet off the necks of the businesses and let people get back to work, or are we just, her signs seem to be pointing towards worse, more and more continued government lockdown in New Mexico.
Yeah. You know what? It's this shoeless Joe Jackson. Say it isn't so, Paul. Hopefully that's not the case. But, at this point, we sure haven't seen signs to the contrary. And there's certainly been a lot of signs pointing the other direction that she is certainly the COVID governor. That's what she likes to do. That's what she's really focused on at the exclusion of many, many other things. And yeah, 13% unemployment, very high for a state that hasn't had that many cases. We're relatively down in cases and in deaths in the per 100,000, common sizing it to others. But yeah, our economy's hurting bad. And as we've said before, we have yet to see what the full impact of oil and gas downturn will be. Maybe not as bad as people thought initially, but the cash cow. One way to diversify New Mexico's economy is have things other than oil and gas. But when you shut down tourism, shut down restaurants, there's not a lot of other industries that just pop up real fast to take over in a state like New Mexico.
No doubt about it. Also, relating to the virus is the fact that APS's school board did make the decision last week to go virtual through the end of 2020. It's worth noting that board member Peggy Muller-Aragon chose or pushed a different approach. She did not vote with the majority of the APS school board. But for folks out there with kids, there's not many options available. And in advance of this meeting, they had a poll available at APS's website. I don't know how well publicized it was. My wife's on the PTA of our local school, and she was not aware of this particular survey. It's a survey, not a poll, I should say, because it's not a scientific poll. As people can choose to take it or not. They found some very interesting things. But the most interesting in my book was when parents were asked about what they're doing with their children for this school year. 13.5% said they were thinking about transferring their child to a school that guarantees in-person learning, and 34% were thinking about homeschooling their child. Now, just to be clear, that 34.2% thinking about homeschooling does not mean that all of them believe the virus is overblown and that the governor's lockdowns are unnecessary. They could be on the hyper judicious, hyper careful side of things, and they could be saying, well, I'm going to homeschool my child because I don't want any likelihood that they will be exposed to the virus. But you're talking about close to 50% of parents at APS who took this survey, again, not scientific, but who are saying, I am thinking about real alternatives for my child. This is very interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And we've talked before. The whole issue about this is, I guess, in addition to getting some of the parents some relief, those who actually are working at home, but their kids are with them when they normally would have been in school, which is, I am not in any way making light of that factor. I know several people in that situation, and it's creating tremendous, tremendous challenges. But the other issue is that if you have challenged learning situations, your kids are a little behind already. They have learning disabilities, dyslexia, a lot of other things like that. They are in a very tenuous situation right now because the data is clear, and this data is clear. If you want to use science and data, it's the fact that children who fall behind grade level to a certain point in their elementary and middle school years, a lot of them get to the point where they just basically give up on their educational process and they drop out. Sometimes they actually drop out practically before they actually drop out physically, meaning they just give up. And that is a group that I really have a lot of affinity for. I know a lot of people with learning disabilities and the struggles they've faced and how hard school was for them, but also how important it is to work through that and keep them in school, keep them learning, keep them going forward. And that's been my biggest I don't know what you say, issue focus with right now in terms of one of the huge, huge risks that those students are facing if they have to do distance learning for half a year, or maybe even more.
Yeah, and you can go on to Errors of Enchantment and look through the survey results yourself. I tried to get them through APS. They were not posted front and center. We're also working on getting poll results, or survey results, I should say, from teachers. Teachers were asked to weigh in as well in terms of what they wanted to do moving forward. Corey DeAngelis, a national education expert and scholar, has looked at the numbers nationwide, and he has come to the assessment that the science is not driving this particular discussion when it comes to whether to reopen or how to reopen. It is union strength. The unions have really been the tail wagging the dog in this whole discussion about whether to reopen. The union has pushed back very strongly around the country. Unions have against reopening the schools. But I would be interested, and we're going to work very hard to get the teacher survey data. We got this from someone individually. We did not get this through a public records request. What we have here in terms of the parents' data, it is something that should be made readily available to the public, and the results to an extent were, but APS tends to be pretty jealous in its clinging to information, and it's unfortunate. But we did post the parent survey, and hopefully in the near future we will have the teacher survey up as well. But it is worth noting, finally, on the COVID-19 issue, we'll kind of leave the COVID alone for now. We have a special guest on this week's podcast interview, John Kiesling. He is better known as Governor from the Governor Knows Best video that was virally making its way around New Mexico. He's done some other really humorous things about the songs, COVID-19 related, and he's really knowledgeable about the issue itself, and did a great job with his video. We talked about the creative process and the actual filming process, and Just a really interesting guy, and definitely check out that Governor Knows Best video.
Yeah, the one thing I will say is twice as many people have watched his video so far as have gotten COVID in New Mexico. So I don't know if that means anything or not, but very creative, very entertaining, and like all good political satire, I think it really makes a point in a way that a lot of people are resonating with. Hence those 55,000 views.
Exactly. Now, as we all sit at home, allegedly helping the governor achieve her our goals for COVID-19, hopefully we're doing so in air conditioning because, darn it, it's been pretty hot out there. California, too, has been sweltering under a heat wave. And in California, to be sure, there have been instances where, the electricity isn't exactly working like it's supposed to. But I'm going to read right now from a PNM post on Facebook. As we deal with record-setting heat in the West, energy companies in the West are limited today. The forecasted pockets of cloud cover in New Mexico this afternoon, they're not writing very well. PNM solar generation could be reduced. Therefore, we are proactively asking customers to help reduce their energy usage by turning up their air conditioning to 78 degrees or higher, if you choose. 78 is oh so comfortable. And delay the use of other high energy appliances such as dishwasher, washer, and dryer until 9 p.m. or later. These steps will help reduce the strain on our grid in the next few days, blah, blah, blah. So, P&M's at 20% thanks to the first round of renewable portfolio mandates from Governor Bill Richardson. Took effect this year, 2020. I don't know what their actual renewable level is at P&M these days, but that's the theoretical mandate. That is a awful problem to be having. California is at 33% on their mandate right now, and we're talking about going 100%, and California is going in the same direction. Are we all going to be sitting in the heat, in the dark, hopefully post-COVID by then, Wally? But
this is starting to sound like a Mad Max episode
Indeed.
in a post-apocalyptic world. So the answer is, I hope not. So, a number of things. One, it's hotter than heck in August, and we have, I don't know, I think there's smoke clouds, frankly. This quote-unquote cloud cover, a lot of it has to do with the fires that are in California, Colorado, New Mexico, much of the West. But and there's a future guest, not to steal his thunder. I know we record some of the policy ones ahead, but there is this whole issue about reliability and what role it plays. But, you don't have to take it from me. This last September 12th, the Public Utility Commission in California actually took some action to extend the lives of natural gas fired generation facilities in California because they were very concerned about the reliability of the electricity grid. And so, it's one of the things that things like they've put in place in California, the Energy Transition Act. I like to call it, just because I've seen it too much, I call it aspirational regulation, meaning a lot of times these laws and regulations get put in place, and the people that put them in place don't have any indication or any belief that you will get to 100% of the goal. But when basically it starts hitting the fan at some point in the future, you will at least pressure the industries into doing what you want to do. I have always had the belief about the New Mexico Energy Transition Act that will be the case. Now, I will just be the first to say I could be wrong. Maybe batteries are going to be great. And, batteries overcome all, if not most, of the shortcomings of wind and solar if they're cheap enough and reliable enough. But even in that, Paul, we talked a little earlier today. There is the Arizona Public Service battery fire New Mexico is on a path to use batteries of a scale and of a scope that I won't call it unprecedented worldwide, but we're out there on the bleeding edge in terms of what we're doing. So maybe we'll get to, and I mean that maybe tongue in cheek, have to, as a state, deal with these issues a little sooner than maybe some people realize.
Yeah, and of course, we have the coal-fired power plant, San Juan Generating Station, still operating at least until the summer of 2022. The middle of the summer, it's supposed to shut down. Now it could remain open if the carbon sequestration proposal makes its way through. And I wrote a column this week about El Paso Electric. They have a very different grid mixture, what they put on the grid here. Well, in New Mexico, Las Cruces, also El Paso in Texas, but their mix was 36.6% natural gas, 48.7% nuclear, and then 2.8% renewable, with the rest coming from purchased power across the region. You know, that's going to be a very tricky challenge for them, for El Paso Electric, to change their whole structure as well, especially if they try to go 100% renewable. It's one thing to get zero carbon, and nuclear counts. So there you go. You're right that at 50% basically zero carbon, it might be a challenge to pull off that 36% natural gas. Of course, they can maybe sell it in Texas and work massaging the situation. But it is a real challenge for New Mexico. And I guess what it's worth knowing is that California is already having blackouts and brownouts. They're ahead of us on the path. New Mexico is rapidly, seemingly trying to catch up, and PNM is already crying uncle. That's with the coal-fired power plant still going. So where are we going to be when the San Juan Generating Station is no more? Are we going to have reliable power moving forward? I think PNM is asking those questions, and the rest of us need to be asking those questions.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And these issues are very complicated. They are highly risky. The Public Utility Commission, Public Regulation Commission. I was doing some old historical work. They've changed the name of it. So they make rulings on proposals from the utilities in terms of what they can and can't do. And they have huge consequences. The only problem with these decisions is they're not the kind that they're immediately apparent as to whether what was a good idea versus what was a bad idea. Believe me, the folks that were building nuclear power plants before the 3 Mile Island came and made the cost of those go up sometimes 10, 20, 30, 40 times what it was before, thought that they had a good, reliable approach to electricity that was going to stand the test of time. And we certainly have a lot of investment in wind and solar, and then what comes with that if you can't build any other fossil fuels, batteries, and those better perform well, or we will find ourselves having to make some adjustments, just like the people in California seeming like they are. And actually, as you said, we got there already here in New Mexico.
No doubt about it. Now, going to leave that topic behind, and hopefully your electricity is steady.
May your electricity always be flowing.
Exactly. Especially if you're stuck home, allegedly on quarantine. Real quickly, we will publish this at some point here on our podcast feed, but I sat down and talked to the folks at the Cato Institute about Roswell Air Center, Walker Air Force Base, some of the social and economic issues regarding that shutdown process, which happened over 50 years ago, but is still a challenge for the Roswell community, and what to do with the old Air Force Base. It's turned into the Roswell Air Center. It has operated, among other things, as the airport. It's also a so-called boneyard for old and planes, commercial jets needing refurbishing or being sold off as scrap. It's quite an interesting effort being undertaken there to make that an economic driver. But I talk about that for a Cato Institute podcast, which they do a great podcast, and we've talked about this report a little bit. But it's worth noting that just in the last week, fair amount of attention has been focused down there. American Airlines, as you might imagine, Wally, airlines across the country are limiting their flights. They're canceling flights. One of the reasons that they've seen a huge burst in growth in terms of the number of planes being stationed down at the boneyard down there at the Roswell Air Center. And also, so that's going to impact the community. I believe the flight was from here to Phoenix, but Roswell has a relatively small handful of flights. And I think flights at the Sunport, the last I checked, were down 95% over the previous year. Just the number of people getting on board airplanes has collapsed. And who knows when that'll change. But I guess the good news is Sky, I think that's how they pronounce it, Sceye. It is essentially a dirigible-based internet provider where they put their very high-altitude balloons, dirigibles, up in the air, and they provide internet service to folks in areas that are not getting internet service. So
yeah,
it was
the
profiled in
satellite
the paper.
technology, but just a lower elevation because, there's a lot of places in New Mexico in particular that could utilize a service like that, remote internet.
Yeah.
Particularly if you need distance learning to have your kids be in school. And I know we've kind
Right.
of put that one to bed, but something about a quarter of the students in New Mexico don't have access to the internet. And of those, half of them may have a hard time getting it, even if cost was no obstacle.
Yeah, and having a internet service provider, someone using this technology could really make a dent in the problem of broadband connectivity in rural communities, not just here in New Mexico, but around the globe, Africa, other nations, where it's really hard to get in touch with people outside your region. So we'll see if that company succeeds, but they are based out of the Roswell Air Center. They're one of many businesses, and we detail this in a policy report that was put together and released recently that kind of formed the basis for the podcast. But definitely a fascinating effort underway in southeast New Mexico to repurpose this base that was closed many years ago. There's been Levi Jean manufacturing. There's been buses manufactured.
Yeah, buses, yes.
It's been a really interesting thing to study. Moving forward, some more good news. I would consider Sky or Sci a really good news issue. But since the Janus versus ASME Supreme Court decision was made 2 summers ago, we've seen a lot of people, especially union members in the state of New Mexico. So state of New Mexico government employees, people employed by the state, have been leaving their union in droves. The data we have says that in 2018, 5,853 unionized workers for the state. In 2020, that is now 2,702. So a 53.8% drop. Some school districts and counties have varying numbers, but the state of New Mexico is a real big data point, and it's something that is going to have impacts down the road for the financials of groups like AFSCME and other politically oriented organizations that rely on the free flow of coerced union dues in order to fund political campaigns. So right now, they undoubtedly are hurting for some of those forced union dues. Essentially, all the Supreme Court decision said was if you don't want to pay dues to the union and you work in the government, you don't have to pay those dues. You can't be forced to pay that union and then, as a privilege of working for the state of New Mexico or other, some school district or other government.
Yeah, you know, the comment that always I found mildly amusing was that when people talk about getting big money out of politics in terms of people putting large chunks of money, the government union chunks of money that's been thrown at elections and thrown at the process never seemed like that was the fore of that conversation.
No doubt about it. In the Albuquerque Journal, this is from Sunday's edition, Sunday, August 23rd. Is Civic Plaza a school?
Of course it is, Paul.
Yeah.
Who would have thought otherwise? The Civic Plaza School.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what does this matter?
Now, as a recently minted downtown worker, I have yet to see any kids, even in COVID-19, as people go back to school and try for innovative solutions. I haven't seen any groups of small children meeting in Civic Plaza in Albuquerque to go over their lessons or anything like that.
But even if they were, would that make it a school? I mean, that's
Right.
another issue. So,
Well, there would be some interesting wildlife to study. It's downtown Albuquerque,
yes.
after all.
Yes.
So the question is relevant because New Mexico's constitution pretty clearly prohibits local governments from making laws relating to the right to keep and bear arms, Second Amendment rights. And City of Albuquerque, Mayor Tim Keller, has been very, if you will, proactive in his efforts to try to exert his left-wing agenda, his progressive policies, by cracking down on people who have weapons in Civic Plaza. And interestingly enough, the story is all about two African-American men who have gotten into legal hot water. They said they had no idea that the city, they don't pass anything. They just reinterpret their law and say community centers or parks or Civic Plaza, those are all now considered education institutions or schools, because schools under the state law, under state constitution, under federal law, you can't bring a gun to a school free, gun free zones, etc. Fine, fair enough. But Civic Plaza, it's pretty hard to say is a school. I guess where it is now, I think the Torres, the district attorney, seems pretty convinced that this will not hold up in court. He's asked for a public opinion on the issue from AG Balderas, who very political, very left wing. He will eventually be asked for his opinion, but he's probably trying to avoid it for as long as possible, and then he'll slip it out under his door.
And to be clear, an attorney general opinion, it doesn't mean nothing. It means something. I'm not trying to take away from that, but that is not a court ruling on that issue as well. So it is something that can provide some guidance. But that's just like when businesses get opinion letters from attorneys on various transactions. That doesn't mean that somebody's not going to sue them and prevail just because you have this letter in your hand. So,
yeah. So it's a very messy situation. To be clear, it does appear that these African American men were discriminated against. They were specifically targeted by the police for having their guns. Others have been on Civic Plaza with guns and have not necessarily been, involved in legal procedures or, called to account for having them. Obviously, we don't know all the details. It's from a newspaper article, but just the kind of government overreach that really the courts should strike this down. The Attorney General should make it clear that Mayor Keller is overreaching. It's absurd that this is even happening, but this is where we are in the year 2020.
okay, so I've heard of the School of Rock. Now I've heard of the School of Civic Plaza. So we'll see how this one all plays out. But it seems like it is even in New Mexico, maybe that one's a bit of a stretch.
One would certainly hope. And of course, the city has a resolution that they're trying to change the Constitution of the state, they put out a resolution saying that we want to see changes made relating to gun control. And so maybe we'll have another guest on here soon talking about gun control in the state of New Mexico, because clearly the political momentum, the political discussion, it's very hot still, and the left-wing folks like Mayor Keller are trying to take your rights away. Finally, the rail runner has not been in service, but
nobody cared.
Nobody cared. But
well, not nobody cared. Not very many people care, because not very many people ride the rail runner on a good day. So,
yeah, but the rail runner has supposedly been working to implement positive train control, which is a federal regulation that's supposed to stop train crashes. New Mexico or the rail runner is one of two states in the country, two projects, I guess, in the country that have 0% compliance over the 95 miles of track. If they don't get it done by the end of the year, there's issues and fines and problems.
And is there an estimate on the cost? Because I know this story, but it's been a while since I've read about what it might cost to add that.
It's supposed to cost $60 million.
Okay.
Now, the state is hoping that
the feds will
Uncle Sam,
kick in,
which is the way things always work. But boy, that is a lot of money for a very lightly used rail system, and it's 0%. It just shows you how there's just so many problems with the rail runner, and so many issues. It's not even being used. It hasn't been used since COVID-19 really got started. It would be great if this was the nail in the coffin, so to speak, and that one business that went out of business during the COVID-19, deservedly so, was the New Mexico Rail Runner Express. We shall see, but $60 million, that's still not chump change. That's definitely not chump change for New Mexico. It's probably, if it was up to just New Mexico to come up with that money, I do think they'd probably pull the plug, but Washington is always there with more debt-fueled money to bail out states that do stupid things. And in this case, building the rail runner was a very stupid thing. All right, Wally, we're going to let it go there. It's been another very, very busy week, and we'll be back at you next week. And just keep your heads up. It's tough out there. It's bad enough when this whole thing started out, we didn't have a firm grasp on how the virus was going to spread and how dangerous it really was. Now I think we kind of know the situation. Took my kids to the zoo this weekend. Boy, there's some people out there who just say the masks are zero problem, but I got to tell you, hanging out at the zoo in 98 degree heat, it's no fun, and kids especially are not into the full day of mask or even a couple hours of mask outside. Full day of mask in school would be tough too, but it's the heat and the kind of oppressive government way they're doing things is very frustrating.
Yeah, it is very frustrating, and one I would love to see as put the exercise exemption back on there. And I will say that I exercise in places that there are some people, but not a lot, both in the Bosque and the foothills, riding my mountain bike, going on hikes. Out in the wild, mask compliance is very, very low. You go to Costco or Sam's, it's almost 100%.
Sure.
Out there on the trail, it's almost zero.
Yeah, well, people are sensible, and while we can say whether mask good, mask bad, mask in between, effective, ineffective, people want to be reasonable. They want to be perceived as being reasonable, and it is reasonable, at least, whether you agree or disagree with masks, that you should wear them inside. It is completely unreasonable to wear them outside. And I think even at the zoo, you can fairly socially distance yourself to the point where you don't need to have a mask on outside in 90+ degree heat. But anyway, that's yet another topic for yet another time, Wally. Thanks for listening to this week's show. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter. And tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.